Bwana asifiwe. Bwana asifiwe. Asante, tunashukuru Mungu kwa sababu ya siku nyingine njema ambayo ametukirimia nayo. Ikiwa leo siku ya Thursday, tunakaribia kufika mwisho wa kambi letu, na tunashukuru kwa vile ambavyo Mungu amekuwa pamoja nasi na vile ambavyo ametuongoza tangia tulipo hadi kufika wakati huu. Na washukuru wote ambao tumekuwa pamoja katika vipindi vyetu vya uongozi. Now, jana swali likaulizwa tulipokuwa tukimaliza. Aliyeuliza swali ako? Hilo swali tutajibu baadaye, maana mwenye kuuliza yuko, na ni vizuri tuweze kujibu akiwa. Kuna mwingine ako na swali? Tangu Monday, Tuesday na jana, kuna mtu ako na swali na kupata nafasi ya kuuliza? Good. Jana tulikuwa tukiangalia Moses, ama mafunzo ambayo, some leadership lessons that we can get from Moses, and because of time we did not finish, and today I want to hurry up and do the last 2 or 3 points, and then we will proceed to today's lesson. We said point number 1, he was a humble person. This is for the sake who are not here yesterday, so that at least you can get what we discussed yesterday. Number 1, we said that Moses was a humble person. Number 2, we said he loved the people whom he led. He loved the people whom he led. His main priority was people. Number 3, we saw that he had a close relationship with God than with men. He had a more vertical relationship than horizontal relationship. That is a relationship with God than men. The other point, we said he was prepared to listen. Moses was prepared to listen. The other point, we said that he was not ambitious for leadership. He was not ambitious for leadership. I think that's where we left yesterday, because time was over. Today, we are going to the next point, whereby we see Moses was appointed by God. Moses was appointed by who? By God. You know, there are 2 types of leaders in this world, or in the church of God. The first type is the leader whom God has appointed. By the way, there are even 3. Number 2 is a leader who has been appointed by men, but God is not with him. And the third category of a leader is those who appoint themselves to be leaders. Ama mjaona kitu kama hiyo? They are there. You know, sometimes, Pastor, I wonder whether this is God or men or yourself. For example, you're in a nominating committee. Mnachagua kiongozi wa watoto. Unaona mama anainua mkono, anasema Pastor Kairiba, na yeye ndiye Pastor Kairiba. Sasa hiyo ni Mungu amechagua, ni yeye amechagua, ama ni watu? Anajipendekeza, maana ameona ni kana kwamba mtamuona. I have seen those things, and sometimes I laugh. Ninacheka tu, maana sasa na ikifika hapo inakuwa. So Three types. One, God-appointed leaders. Number two, leaders who have been appointed by men. And number three, those who have appointed themselves. Now, in these categories, there is a danger in the second and the third category. Because sometimes you may appoint a leader without God's consent, and then the consequences follow. So, as we said yesterday morning, is that God himself chose Moses, and he called him when Moses was not even ambitious or leading, and he convinced him that he is the best person who suits leadership in the children of Israel. So he took up the initiative, and we see from the life of Moses that for sure God was with him in his leadership, even though of course there were many challenges, but what we see is that God was with him. And leaders who have been appointed by God, always they have a close relationship with God. They have a connection with who? With God. And they always carry the agenda of God, because it is God who has appointed them and he has given them his agenda. And by the way, Pastor, sometimes I wonder, unasikia mzee wa kanisa anasema kanisa langu alitaenda mahali fulani. Sio kama umesikia jambo kama hilo, Pastor. Mzee anasema kanisa la nani? Mzee wa Sukari katika wazee wengine wote kwa mkutano anasema kanisa langu hiyo siku hawatapatikana. When did that become your church? Imekuwa kanisa lako lini? And because back in your mind you are saying kanisa langu, even the decisions you are taking not with God's interest at heart, but your interest as what? As at heart. And this is where we mess. This is how we go wrong as leaders. This is where we fail. We fail as leaders whenever we take the church of God as our property. Sometimes, yes, it's out of ignorance, but other times we do it deliberately. You take a decision, maybe single-handedly, a decision that concerns the church, even without consulting the church. Unachukua tu msimamo ya kwamba kanisa langu hiyo siku Pastor Wangaki alitakuja Githurai. Kwa nini? Tuna mchango ama tuna mgeni Pastor Kairiba tumemwalika na tumemwandaa siku nyingi, kwa hivyo hatutafanya nini? Hatutakuja mkutano wa district. Kwa hivyo tuhurumie, na ni wewe umeamua peke yako. Your church. Is it your church or God's church? If it's God who has appointed you as a leader, remember always to carry his agenda with you. So Moses, we've seen God had appointed him. Another point, he knew what God said. Another issue. He knew what God did what? Said. Jesus says, my sheep, that's what? They know me and they recognize my voice. My voice. Wanasikia sauti yangu na wanaielewa. How many times have we not heeded to the voice of our master, to the voice of the one who has called us? By the way, I normally say, when you see an elder fighting with a fellow elder, then check whether they have known who has called them. When you see an elder fighting with a pastor, again check and see whether these people, they know who has called them. Because if all of us, we are serving the same interest, we are serving the same master, how can we go against each other? And you know, let me tell you, the lack or the consequence of not knowing the voice of God, one of them is this. Do you remember Miriam and Aaron? Hello? Do you remember Miriam and Aaron? Who were they? Siblings of Moses. And by the way, I think God might have also, in one or the other, used them to assist Moses in leadership. You see? They were close to Moses. They knew, if anything, they could be maybe the next after Moses, the next to God, because they are brother and direct relationship with God. But remember, one day they conspired against Moses and they said, no, I think this man is not the best leader. Number one, he went to Cush and did what? Married there. And according to God, you cannot marry there. Number two, does it mean that he is the only person who can lead us? After all, I'm a prophetess. After all, you see, they give reasons, and you see those reasons were some varied. But God told them, listen, I've chosen Moses. And if I'll need to choose you, wait for your time to do what? To come. I'm just but paraphrasing. Wait for your time to come. At times, when we don't listen to the voice of God, when we don't recognize the voice of God, we tend to do contrary things that does not go hand in hand with the will of God. Now, the last point on that part that we may go to today's lesson. Yes, my pastor.
We are not maybe they can hear my voice.
Yes.
The danger when the elder in any local church, if the wife does not support the elder, if the sons and daughters does not support the elder, it's the same challenge that Moses faced. You know, people were asking if Aaron and Miriam, they have seen he's not the leader, who are we to support him? So that is the danger when you get an elder in a local church, the wife does not support him, and maybe the children does not support him. If that comes, then an elder will fail simply because people are watching. How I wish that our wives to support us and our children to support us. That is as far as the local church elder is concerned. But what about the pastor? Pastor Kailiba, you and I, we are in danger because if your wife does not support you in the ministry, how can you stand before the people?
You can't.
Men and women look at you and say, well, if the wife cannot support you, we have even seen he is not capable. But if your wife is closer to you and he can stand and pray before the congregation, then that tells me this family, God will give them more blessings than before.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor, for that comment. The last point part is that Moses was called from looking after the sheep to looking after God's people. He was called from looking after what? The sheep to looking after what? Where have you been called from? Before God called you as a leader, what were you doing? What were you doing? Sometimes we just come from anywhere and then we enter into God's service without knowing the adults that are that go hand in hand with the leadership position that you've been given and the responsibilities that you've been given, and by the end of the day you fail, not because you are not a good leader, but because you've not known the dynamics. You've not known the dynamics. So it's good to introspect yourself and ask, Where have I been called from? And for what purpose has God called me to do? So you need to know God has called you not for any other business. It is to look after his what? People. Not to your people, not to your church, not to your congregation. Is what? And this is why Paul is admonishing the elders in Ephesus. He tells them, elders, let me tell you, take heed of yourselves, but more so of the flock. Not to your flock, of the flock of God, which he bought, or Jesus Christ bought through his own what? His own blood. So the people who come to church, they are not my people, they are God's people, and they are peculiar people because God has, or Jesus Christ has delivered them and redeemed them through his blood. So you need not to joke with God's people. You cannot joke with God's people. You cannot joke with the possession that you've been given because it is a possession that is so delicate. Today, I want us also to have some lessons from the experience of Nehemiah. Some lessons from Nehemiah. The book of Nehemiah is one of the books that sometimes we may not have time for. But when I was doing my study, I came to realize the book of Nehemiah has a number of religious or Christian principles of leadership. It has a number of principles that can govern ourselves as we lead the church of God. Yes, you are a leader. You've been elected as a leader, and you know the church in an Adventist church, every other person is a leader. Why? Because today I'm the church elder, tomorrow I'm a deacon, sub superintendent. The other one, today he was just a bank bencher. Tomorrow, every other person is a leader. Now, you are a leader. What is your primary responsibility? What is your primary responsibility as a leader? Nehemiah reminds us something. Nehemiah chapter 1 verse 9. It reminds us that in this ministry that we have been called, we are called to obey God's command. Can you read for us Nehemiah chapter 1 verse 9? Yes. You do what? You obey my commands. My commands. Whose command? God's commands. So my primary responsibility as a leader, my primary responsibility as a pastor, your primary responsibility as a church elder is to obey God's command. And he says, if you obey his commands, then he will be with you. He will lead you. Obeying his command. Obeying God's command. Now, one point I'm seeing when you read verse 8 of the same chapter, I'm seeing a catastrophe. I'm seeing a danger, because I'm seeing whenever unfaithfulness to God happens, or whenever we have unfaithfulness to God, this brings a disaster to all. Can you read for them verse 8? unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. You know, by the way, the things that we are experiencing in the church of God, it's because all of us, we have forgotten God's command. We've turned away from God. We are unfaithful to God. And because of that, we walk naked among the nations. Do you remember when we had an issue with the Central Church? Pastor, one day, I think it was last year, I had a camp meeting, and we went at, we were in Dhaka. So, one of the days, I went to KCB to withdraw some cash for the camp meeting. I was me and my elder. And when we went there, it was in August, we wanted to draw some cash. They asked us, are you the same SDA that we are of? Are you the same? You know, we didn't have once because hii mambo imefika kila mahali. Tunaenda kutoa pesa tu, hatuna mambo mengine. Nyinyi ni wale. Sasa imagine KCB and what happened in Central Church. How does it connect? But it went all over. Why? Because God's people, whenever they disobey him, and disaster comes to the members or to the people, to the entire congregation. If I, as a pastor, turns away from God, I may bring a disaster to the church. If a church elder runs away from God, is unfaithful from God, he may bring a disaster to the members also. When members and leaders obey God's command, the church will be spiritual and the church will grow spiritually. When the leaders and the members, so here it's not only the leaders, it is a collective responsibility of the leaders and the members, that when we are faithful, we grow spiritually. Every day we get nourishment from heaven simply because we follow God's command. We follow God's command. No doubt, Nehemiah proposes that we need both to be spiritual or spiritually mature and effective leaders in a church. We have a danger here, especially when it comes the time of elections, because at times tunachagua mtu kwa sababu ya ile mali aliyo nayo, maana amekuja tu na yeye tu ndiye anatoa pesa nyingi ya zaka. Mnasema hayo, ukiona vile anatoa zaka nyingi hivi, huyu ni mwaminifu, kwa hivyo tumpatie uzee wa nini, ama tumpatie treasurer, bila kujua hiyo zaka mingi anatoa hata ifiki nusu ya zaka ile anapaswa kutoa. Unaona? Hata ifiki nusu, but simply because ametoa mingi, mnasema we think so and so ndiye anafaa. Mnaweka mtu kiongozi wa development simply because amekuja hapa na Ferrari. Mnajua gari inaitwa Ferrari? One of the expensive cars. Maana ndiye anakuja naye hapa, anasema, "Ai, huyu ile pesa yako nayo atajenga nayo kanisa ya Mungu." But spiritually this man is not mature. He is not mature. So when he comes to leadership, he comes with those secular mind, without subscribing to the will of God. Na unakuta instead of the work moving, the work stagnates. And then you tend to wonder, why is the work stagnating? Simply because we have not grown maturely. We are not spiritually mature. So, my brethren, when all of us, we are mature, then the church of God moves upward. Nehemiah, his principle of leadership is about transformative, constant change. Transformative, constant what? Change. A change that is a transforming one. A transforming change. An upward transforming change. These principles are time tested, they are proven, and also they are universal. Time tested, proven, and universal. So now, according to Nehemiah, what is leadership? Number one, leadership is influence. Have you heard me? Leadership is influence. Leadership is influence. We may not have time to read all these verses, but you can write for perusal at your own time. Nehemiah chapter number 2, verse 5 to 8, 16 to 18, and Acts chapter number 27. But for today, for now, let's do only verse 5 to 8 of the second Nehemiah. You hear what Nehemiah did. Chapter 2, verse 5 to 8, what does it say?
Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 5 to 8. It says, And I answered the king, if it pleases the king and your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah, where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take, and when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set at a time. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah.
You may leave it there. Now, that those few verses tells us that Nehemiah had an influence. First, with the king, and when you read downwards, you come to realize even when he went to his forefather's home, his influence mattered a lot in bringing people together and again making sure they are all focused in what he was to do. So every leader, you need to have an influence. You need to influence the people whom you are leading. Point number two, everything lies and falls on leadership. Everything lies and falls on leadership or the leader. Yes. As a leader, you need to know the buck stops with who? With you. If you are a sleeping leader, then those who are being led also, they will continue sleeping. You need to lead by example. You need to know the vision that you want to cast, how you've casted it, and how to achieve it, because it all rests with you. It all depends with what you do. And that's why unakuta mtu amechaguliwa mzee ama kiongozi wa ujenzi mwaka huu, akichaguliwa from January to December, kitu imefanyika ni viti 5 imenunuliwa. Mwingine anaingia katika uongozi from January to December, unakuta ile kazi imefanyika, kanisa imejengwa. The same people, si kwamba watu wamekuja wengine wapya, ni wale tu. But the first leader ni viti 5. The other person, kanisa imejengwa. What didn't matter is Ni nini? The leader knowing the buck stops with who? With him. The vision that you cast to the people matters a lot. Nehemiah chapter 4, you can write the one. Utaenda kusoma nyumbani, verse 9 to 15. 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 10 to 17. Those one are that were on a convenience time. Number 3, leadership takes responsibility for every area of the task. Leadership takes responsibility for every area of the task. You need to take responsibility as a leader. Don't run away from responsibilities, be it good or bad. Unajua viongozi wengine mambo ikienda murama, ikienda kombo, anasema si mimi, ilikuwa ni pasa Wangaki. Lakini ikienda vizuri, anasema yenyewe tunashukuru, nimejaribu sana. You see? Lakini wakati imeanguka, unaepa. You take a vote katika church board. Mambo inaenda inaharibika. Ikiharibika and you are in the church board and you took the same vote with them, unasema hata niliwaambia. Ni bila kufanya nini? Hawako nisikiza. Na nilijua. Ulijua na kama ulijua mbona kutuambia saa hiyo? So as a leader, take responsibility of everything that happens, be it good or bad. You are a leader. You are a leader. Sometimes when mzee umeacha mambo ifanyike, umekuta mende vibaya, yes, kubali umekosea. And taking responsibility does not demean you as a leader. Haikudunishi. Nehemiah chapter 6 verse 1 to 14. 2 Corinthians chapter 11 24 to 28. All those, they are encouraging us to take responsibility, because even Nehemiah took responsibility of every other action that transpired. Number 4. Thank you. Number 4, the most important ingredient. The most important ingredient to good leadership is credibility. The most important ingredient to good leadership is what? Credibility. To be credible. Credible. Transparent. Trustworthy. Name them all. Najua ili kanisa ni la ajabu. Kwanza wakati wa makambi kama upasta, people are not credible. They are not even transparent. I don't know here, sija ikuja hapa tena. Unakuta ya kwamba umepewa pesa ukanunue vitu ya makambi, unaenda hata unapewa discount na unambagain na unanunua shilingi 5 kila kitu, unapokuja unaandika ni 10. Already umekula 5 wengine juu na vitu zingine. Am I credible as a leader? What do people see in me as a leader? I've been to a church mahali ambapo ikifika wakati wa makambe wanapigania especially catering department. Catering, mahali kuna chakula inapiganiwa. And I did my own investigation. Why? Mbona hii kitu ni kama ni vita? Unakuta hata watu wanaoletwa wachukue hiyo kazi, yani ni mrorongo wa watu. When I did my own investigation, I came to realize watu hapo ndipo watajirikia. Tukaenda mahali na mzee ambaye alikuwa chairman wa makambi mwaka huo, alikuwa ni mzee pia mwerevu. Akatuma watu kununua chakula. And he gave out around 130,000. After 2 hours, wanampigia simu. Mzee, ile pesa imeisha na bando tunandaiwa kama 40,000. Kwa hivyo tutumie, tulipe, ndio tufanye nini? Ndio tuweke vitu vizuri. Akamwambia ni sawa, nitawatumia saa hii, acha nitafute mahali kuna M-Pesa. It was not very far away from them. It was about 30 kilometers. He drove there. After that minute akamwambia, muko wapi? Tuko mahali fulani. Akaenda. Akamwambia sasa tuendeni mahali mlikuwa mnalipa. Nikafanya nini? Nilipe. Do you know how much he paid? 5,000. Only. Na alikuwa ameambiwa ngapi? 40. 35 ilikuwa iliwe. Na katika ingine 130. Si hata unaona ni kana kwamba walikula zaidi. Why should you do this? Anyway, there was a question yesterday. Yule aliuza amekuja? Umefika? Good. Pasa. Mwenye swali amefika. Hebu jibu kabla kengele ya pili japigwa. Tutaendelea na hii kesho.
Ikiwa professionally wewe ni daktari na tunatafuta kiongozi anaweza kuongoza department hiyo, naweza sema professionally that is my area. Tunaweza kukuchagua, si dhambi. Lakini ikiwa wewe si daktari na unasema ungependekeza uchaguliwe kuwa kiongozi katika department hiyo, then there is something you are aiming, ya kwamba utakapochaguliwa hapo I'll be able to supply one or two things to this. Lakini ikiwa utalalamika, then narudi pale pale tu mahali nimeanzia, ya kwamba huenda ikawa wewe umeona mbali mahali sisi hatujaona, which means you have an hidden agenda, more especially in the elder's office. Mzee hawezi kujichagua, ni watu wanamchagua, na sisi wachungaji tunapitia mazito. Nakumbuka piga kengele hiyo dakika moja hapo. Nakumbuka kuna mahali nilifanya uchaguzi. Alafu nikasema leteni majina, mnataka wasee wangapi? Wakasema kanisa letu limekuwa tunataka wasee 7. Waambia basi ili nipate 7 tupatie majina ya watu 10 watu 7. Alafu mmoja akasema
Asanti, pasa amejibu kabisa. Tusimame tuombe, tukiombea kipindi nyingine, maana mhubiri yako hapa. Bwana, tunasema ni asanti kwa maana fadhili zako. Umekuwa pamoja nasi katika kipindi cha uongozi. Tunapoingia kipindi cha kujifunza Biblia, pia Bwana ukaweza kumtumia mtumishi wako kandi na mapenzi yako. Tena mapenzi yako nasi nimeomba kwa Yesu aliye Bwana wake yetu. Amen.